Well, welcome back to Michael's Community Classroom, everybody. My name is Allie W. I'm from Yarn Inspirations, and I'm here today with fantastic Tamara from Moogly. And we have a wonderful project to kick off the year that I'm so excited about. But before we jump in, I just wanted to remind you all that if you have any questions about the pattern or what we're working on today, please feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll help get those over to Tamara as class goes along. Perfect. And I'm going to be dropping a link to the pattern for today's class here in the chat in just one moment. So you'll be able to get that.
Okay.
And
All right. I think it's my turn then. Hi, I am Tamara from Moogly, and today I'm going to be teaching the big ridge throw. And so in the description for the class, the way it's described is a knit crochet throw. So we're not knitting today, we are crocheting, but it has a really neat knit look. And that's achieved by working into the stitches a little differently and by working lengthwise. So rather than working, say, from one end of the blanket, the feet to the head, if you will, for this blanket, we're actually working side to side along the length of the blanket. So the rows are going to be long, but there's not going to be as many rows as you might have if you were working the usual way, foot to toe or head to toe, if you will. So that is one thing that's different about what we're doing today. We're also going to be using this really chunky yarn. This is Bernat Blanket Big. Right here you can see this is a 7. So it is a jumbo weight yarn. So to work with this yarn, we need a really big hook. So we are using a 25 millimeter hook. You can see right here, this one is by Susan Bates. Definitely one of the bigger hooks in my collection, and I'm sure one of the bigger hooks in yours as well. If you don't have this big yarn and hook with you today, you can definitely practice this on a smaller yarn, whatever you've got available to you, and a matching hook for you today. So like I say, we're going to be making this blanket, and the pattern itself is relatively simple. Allison should be dropping that in the chat, and hopefully you saw the pictures of it when you signed up for the class, and you saw these really gorgeous ridges in there. So I'm going to go ahead and set this one aside, and let's bring over the hand camera, and we'll switch on over, and I'll show you a little swatch that I've worked up in some not as funny fuzzy yarn. This is the big fuzzy yarn that we're going to be using for the actual blanket. This is a smoother yarn, Bernat Softy Chunky, and I just worked up a little swatch in our pattern today because this yarn is a lot smoother, so it's a lot easier, I hope, for everybody to be able to see the stitches. But you can see I've been working back and forth here in rows, but on our finished blanket, it would actually be this way. And I don't know if you guys can see these lines of texture right here where you've kind of got these rows that want to stand up a little bit. And it looks like I'm freezing a little bit there on camera. Sorry about that. Hopefully the internet connection will solidify a little bit here as we go. But we've got all this texture on one side of the blanket. And then on the back of the blanket, it's relatively smooth. So we're going to be using those special stitches to create that texture. Basically, so here'd be kind of the feet and here'd be the head of the blanket. Like I say, working across the body of the blanket. So the neat thing about this pattern, the other thing I want to mention right away, is that the instructions are written, of course, with a certain number of stitches and rows, but you could really make this blanket any size you like. There's no particular set number of stitches that you need in order to make the stitch pattern work. There's not so much a set number of rows. As long as you end on a row 3 repeat, you're good to go. So you can really adjust this blanket to whatever size you'd like it to make. Just remember, you're working lengthwise, so if you decide to just chain until you've got the length you want, you're chaining for length, not width. So like I say, this is a sample on just a smaller one here, so you can see those, and I might pick this up again a little bit later to demonstrate some of these stitches with this smoother yarn before we make them in our big thick yarn here. So I'm going to set this aside, and then we will find the end of our big thick yarn. So before I get started, Allison, were there any questions on any of that before I start demoing our actual pattern today?
I think we're all set. I know there was one question. Somebody said they only have a 30 millimeter hook and wanted to know if they think that that would be okay for the class.
I think a 30 millimeter hook would be absolutely fine for this class. Now, normally, obviously, if you've crocheted before, you know, a 5 millimeter jump in hooks is going to be a huge jump in hooks for a standard project. I think a 30 millimeter hook with this big yarn is going to be just fine. I would not worry about that one bit. I think you're going to be a-okay. This is some really big thick yarn. We need to give it a couple little extra tugs sometimes to get our stitches to open up. So a little bit bigger hook will be absolutely fine. And again, that link to the pattern should be going into the chat. So when we begin with this yarn, we need to begin with a slip knot in our yarn to put our yarn onto our hook. So what we want to do is find the end of our yarn and come in about a foot or so. You don't have to pull out a measuring tape, just eyeball it. Just a good amount of space there. You want about a foot of space. Then at that foot, what we're going to do is just loop the yarn right on over so that it forms a loop like this. Kind of looks like one of those awareness ribbons. So we'll straighten that out again and do it together. We're going to come in a good foot or so into our yarn and just make a loop like that. Then we pull that tail end behind the loop. So you can see it peeking out right there in the center. And that's where we want to go ahead and grab it and pull that loop up at the same time that we pull down on our other strands. So we pull down on our tail a little bit. This is the tail end. This is the end attached to our skein. And we just want to make a good sized loop there with our yarn. Then we insert our hook so that the tail end is facing us and the skein end is sort of facing away on the back of the hook, if you will. And then we want to just use those ends to snug up our knot a little bit onto our hook. Let me get that up there a little bit. There we are. So that is your slip knot, and that's how we attach the yarn to our hook to get started. So let's go ahead and do that again. And this is valuable too. If you've made your slip knot and it's wonky, you don't like it, you can pull the hook out and just give that tail end a tug, and your yarn should straighten right back out. I don't know if that's why they call it a slip knot, but it's one of the great things about it. So let's do that one more time. After that, we're going to move on. And if you need to, this class should be up on the Michael's YouTube channel within 24 hours, where you can rewatch it at your leisure. So we come in about a foot, we make a loop with our yarn, and go ahead and make that as big as you like, or right there, make it a little easier to see if you'd like. And then pull that tail end, the tail end behind that loop. And then you reach right into that loop, grab it, and pull it up into a loop, like so. Now we've got our slip knot, which is a really adjustable loop. We can adjust the size of this loop by pulling on these ends. Now it takes a little bit of strength sometimes because this is a very fuzzy yarn. But when we've got it about hook sized, we want to go ahead, give it a couple more tugs here and get it cinched up on our hook. We don't want it super tight on our hook. We want to have a good bit of space in there so we can move our hook around in there very easily. But we want to, get it so that it's not hanging off there super loose either. So then what we do is we go to our instructions, and our first instruction is to chain 29 loosely. So again, that's working the whole length of a blanket. For the purpose of demonstration today, I'm not going to make 29 stitches because we've got a lot to show and I want to make sure we can get it all. So I'm going to start with just a few stitches here. And you can start with just a few if you're new to crochet as well. I suggest you make up a swatch to practice. Or you can just kind of follow along and watch and make the full size blanket if you like. So to chain, we've got our slip knot on our hook. I'm going to take the skein end of the yarn and yarn over the hook. We don't want to pull it up in front of us this way. We want to make sure to come up over the hook and then pull that loop through the loop that was on our hook using the hook, just like that. So now we've made one chain and we've got one loop on our hook. And because this yarn is so fuzzy and textured, we want to make sure to pull these loops up a little bit higher. So if you're used to crocheting with thinner yarn or smoother yarn, you want to make sure to give a little extra tug with this yarn because it does have all that texture built right in. But that's what we're doing now. We're just making our chains. So I'm going to keep pulling, yarning over, and then pulling that loop through, yarning over, and pulling that loop through. So now I have made, if we go back and look at our row of chains here, we can see those V's nested into each other. I've made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chains. We do not count the loop that's on our hook as one of those chains. So let's go ahead and make just a couple more because I want just a little bit more width here, I think, on my sample. So I'm going to yarn over, pull through, and yarn over and pull through. And now, if I were making the full-size blanket, I would stop doing this at 27 because it says chain 29, but if we look into row 1, those last 2 chains that we make are going to be our turning chain. We're not going to be working back into them. So up to this point, we've been trying to chain loosely and make sure that these stitches are nice and big so we can get back into them to work our stitches as we go. But the last 2 chains are going to be our turning chain. And the tricky thing about half double crochets is if you do 2 standard size chains, 2 chains like you've been doing, it can be a little bit too tall of a turning chain. But if you only do 1 chain for your turning chain, it can be a little bit too short. And with this blanket in particular, we're not making a border around the finished blanket, so we want to make sure our edges are as great, as perfect as we can make them. So what we're going to do for these last 2 chains, so for instance, with the instructions, we would chain 27 loosely. The last 2 chains, I want you to actually make those a little bit tighter because we're not going to be crocheting back into those. We don't have to worry about them being big enough to get our hook into, and we don't want them to be loose on the sides of our blanket. There we are. So now we've got those 2 made for our turning chains and the rest of the chains that we're going to be working back into. So as I just mentioned, we're not going to be working a border around our finished blanket. So we want to make sure that this first edge is just as beautiful as it can be the way it is. And the way I like to do this is by turning over that chain and working my first row of stitches into that back hump. Now, if you've crocheted before, which hopefully most of you have, you'll know that normally when you crochet, you go under those top 2 loops of the chain and then the top 2 loops of the stitch. But for this pattern and patterns like it, I like to make the first row by working into the hump in the back of each chain. You can see right here how they kind of line up like I always say they're like Loch Ness Monster humps here along the back. What this does is it leaves these 2 loops as your finished edge and is just going to give you a much more beautiful finished project. So let's flip it over and get started here with row 1. I want to skip the first 2 stitches, chains that I made because it says to half double crochet in the 3rd chain from the hook. So there's 1, there's 2. I want to skip both of those. There's the 3rd one. So I'm going to yarn over because we're making half double crochets. Insert my hook under that 3rd hump right there. Yarn over again. Pull that loop through the chain. Now we've got 3 loops on our hook for a half double crochet. And because this yarn is a little more textured, we want to go ahead and give those a little bit of a tug. Then yarn over again and pull through all 3 loops. A standard half double crochet, but with this yarn, you just want to take your time and really make sure that you're pulling all those loops through. And now you can see by working into that back hump of the chain there, we get that really nice edge right there. So then to continue across, we yarn over. Oh, I need to pull up some more yarn from my skein. You'll need to do that a lot with this yarn because you do go through it pretty quickly because it is so thick. There we are. So we yarn over. Let's go back to the back of our chains here and take our time and find that next hump. We've got the one we worked into right here. We just want to follow that line right down. If we come from the top, you can see there's that V. We just want to flip it right over. And there's that hump right on the back. So make our half double crochet, we yarn over, go into the chain, yarn over, pull that loop up and through, make sure that it's up and nice and clear here of our stitches, yarn over again, and pull through all 3 loops to finish our half double crochet. So now we've made 2 half double crochet stitches. You can see our 2 turning chains are right there on the edge. They're nice and tight. You can see our first edge there is nice. And if we look at the top, we can see really carefully, it's hard to see in this fuzzy yarn, but there's the V at the top of our first stitch, and there's the V at the top of our second stitch. So one thing I like to recommend is if you have them available, grab a couple of stitch markers. And this is what stitch markers look like for crochet. That one kind of wants to blend in with my skin tone a little bit, but you can see it's basically like a plastic safety pin. Because with crochet stitch markers, we need them to open back up. So what you can do is you can kind of squish this one together because it is big, thick yarn. You can get at least one of those strands, but ideally both at the top of that first stitch into that stitch marker. There we are. And then that way, when I come back for the next row, I will know that was the first stitch for this row, be the last stitch I work into when I come back the other direction. And that way it'll keep me from getting mixed up with any of my turning chains, and it'll help me keep those edges really straight. So to clarify the number of instructions on the foundation chain, you chain 29. And I still want you to chain 29 or however long you want your blanket to be. I just want you to make those last two chains a little bit tighter than the other chains. That's just going to give you a little bit neater edge right here on the side of your first row. So then we simply continue across. Row 1 is half double crochets in each chain across. So we'll pull those up, give that little bit of a tug there and pull it through. Got a couple more here on my small sample. So I will go ahead and make these so we can move on to row 2. But as I finish up these stitches, Allison, were there any other questions that I might have missed?
There were some people having a bit of trouble finding the hump. So I'm just wondering if you might be able to show that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Like I say, here we've got the, sorry, I know that looks a little bit noisy there on the table, can't be helped. We're going to kind of lay it out here and look at our chain again. This is our first row that we're working back into that chain. And here we've got that V that we normally work into when we're working at our chains. And you just want to literally flip it over. And here's another idea if you are having trouble. Go ahead and grab those two chains, almost like if you were going to work in there with a crochet hook. You know, if you were going to go into those two chains as you normally would. What's left on the bottom? Well, I can't turn my hand over that way. Let's try there. What's left on the bottom is that hump. So if you're used to going into the chain, you know, this way with those two loops on top, the hump is just the one that's normally left on the bottom. We're simply flipping that over. So if you need to, you know, flip it over and look like that and say, okay, this is where I'm used to going. And then you can kind of grab that loop and you'll have it set up for yourself. You kind of hold on to it and get the hook in there. With fuzzy yarns like this, and especially as a beginner, it can be very difficult to read your stitches. When I'm working into the back hump like this, I was practicing a little bit earlier today to make sure I had a good handle on this pattern. And I really had to sit a couple of times, especially as you get down to the end, and really stop and look at my work and see, okay, where is that hump? Where did it want to go on this stitch? And then I was able to find it. So let's show this half double crochet one more time here. I'll slow it down a little bit here as we work into this last chain, although we're going to be making half double crochets for this whole pattern, so you'll see lots of them. To make the half double crochet, we yarn over, insert our hook into the last stitch in this case. So now we've got the loop that was on our hook, our yarn over, we've inserted our hook into the stitch. And like I say, big yarn, big hook. Go ahead and manhandle it a little bit. Push it down on the hook there as needed. Yarn over again. Now we're going to pull that loop just through the chain or the stitch that we're working into. So we still have 3 loops on the hook now. We have the one that was from the last stitch, the one we yarned over with, and now the one we just pulled through. So we yarn over again, and now we pull this through all 3 of those loops. There we go, and give that a little bit of a tug, and that is our half double crochet. So this is what your first row should look like, although a whole lot longer. So for example, if you wanted to make a king-sized bed blanket, or a king-sized, a king-sized blanket, I guess, working off of memory, I believe the standard measurement for a king-size blanket is approximately 100 inches by 100 inches. That might be a little bit big, but I don't know about you. I'd always prefer my blanket to be just a little bit bigger anyway. So what you want to do, I would say for this, the best idea would be to go ahead and make that first chain. Don't stop at 29. Keep going until it is just over 100 inches long. Because remember, those last 2 chains are going to be used up in your turning chain. So you could say chain until it's about 100 inches long and then chain 2 more. And then go back and work across. You could try and work it out from the gauge and things like that that's in the pattern, but since each individual person is really going to have their own gauge and tension level, I think that's probably going to give you the best result. Just make sure you get those chains real loose because it can shrink up a little bit too. So if you want to aim for a little bit bigger, that's also a good plan. But I kind of call that the long chain method of starting projects, where you don't necessarily start with a number in mind, but you chain till you've got the length you want, and then you can just make rows until you've got the width you want. You don't need to worry too much about the actual numbers, thankfully, for this particular pattern. So I hope that helped with that. Anything else before I move on to row 2 here?
There's a question here. How come when I get to the end of my stitches, I end up with one less?
Well, let's see. A couple different ways that I could answer that. A couple different possibilities. So now, if you're counting because you started with chains, if you're saying I started with 29 chains and I only have 28 stitches, you should only have 27 stitches, because we skipped those last 2 chains that we made and then just worked in each remaining chain across. So you are going to have more chains than you have actual stitches. However, if you chained, we'll say 10, and instead of having 8 stitches, you have 8 stitches, maybe you only have 7 stitches, or on the next row you only have 6 stitches, that means you're losing a stitch somewhere. Either you're missing the final chain, or you're skipping one of the chains in between, or if it's happening in future rows, it could be because you're missing the last stitch, thinking it's part of the turning chain, or missing the first stitch. So that's where using the stitch markers can come in really, really handy. Having that stitch marker there, you won't, crochet back across and think, oh, this is part of the turning chain, I can leave it. Having the stitch marker there will help you to make sure you're working to the ends of the row every time. So anything else before we get started here?
I think we're all set right now.
Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead then and move on to row 2. So row 2 begins with a chain 2, as all the rows do. But again, these are turning chains. These are not chains you're going to want to work back into. So we can go ahead and make these relatively tight. Some people prefer to just chain 1 and make it really tall. So sort of the opposite solution. But since we're not doing a border here, I think a tight chain 2 will give us a little bit of a nicer edge here on our finished blanket. Actually, be the bottom edge or the top edge, depending. So we've got our chain 2. And now this is something that is really important, again, especially, well, it's important for all projects, but it's particularly important when you're not going to have a border that's going to sort of, quote unquote, hide your sins, if you will. We always want to make sure that we turn our project the same way. So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to turn it like the page of a book. If you're left-handed, as if you were going backwards in the book. But you just want to make sure to always turn it the same direction. And that way, any twisting that happens in those turning chains along the edge will be the same direction all the way up the side of the blanket. So that's just another tip to help you get a really nice finished project. So then for row 2, we're going to be working into a different part of the stitch. So as I was saying earlier, normally when you work into a crochet stitch, you work under the top 2 loops at the top of the stitch there, right in that little spot right there. This pattern is a little bit different. Let me pull up that little swatch we made again at the beginning here, or that I made, I should say. There we are. And right here is where we're making row 2. And when we make the stitch that I'm about to show you in row 2, it's going to push the top of row 1 to the back, which is the front of our blanket. Because row 1 was made from the right side and row 2 is made from the wrong side. So on the right side of the blanket, we'll get all this texture. So I'm going to come up here and we're going to go ahead and pretend that this last row here, it was half double crochet. So we're going to go ahead and pretend that it is time for row 2 on this little swatch here. I'm going to make my chain 2. And then I want to show you this in the smooth yarn before I show it to you in the fuzzy yarn, because I think it's going to be a lot easier to see right here. So when we make a half double crochet stitch, and I'm actually going to go ahead and pull this back out for a minute and make one more. When we make a half double crochet stitch, we yarn over, go into the stitch, yarn over and pull up our loop, and yarn over and pull through all 3. But if we watch as that happens, this was the loop that was on my hook from the last stitch. This was our yarn over. This is the loop we pulled out of the stitch underneath. When we flip it over, it looks very different. We need to look at the top and say, these are our top 2 loops right there. And right there is where we would normally work into to do a half double crochet under those top 2 loops, right? We just yarn over and go under those top 2 loops. So what I want you to notice is the loop that's right underneath where we normally put our hook. That one right there, that is sometimes called the third loop. Sometimes it's called the horizontal loop in front. It goes by many different names, but that is the loop we're looking for right there. So I'm going to do my chain 2 and yarn over, because I'm going to be making a half double crochet. I find that first stitch. Normally I would go under those top 2 loops. For this pattern for row 2, I want to go under just that loop right there, the horizontal loop, that straight loop that's right in front of our stitch. So for this, we would yarn over and go up from underneath just that loop. We want to ignore the top 2 loops that we would normally work into, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then we can just finish our half double crochet. Let's do that again here, because I know the internet connection wants to freeze a little bit tonight. So we'll yarn over again, find that very next horizontal loop. If you need to, you can kind of flip it over, find the V at the top, find the horizontal loop in front of it, get your hook up under that horizontal loop, yarn over and pull through, and yarn over and pull through all 3. So what has that done? You can see here, if I flip it back over to the right side of our fabric, it has pushed those top 2 loops forward to the front of the blanket to create that texture. So let's go ahead and try it on our big fuzzy yarn. Still want to take a moment and look at our stitches, because it can be really hard with this big fuzzy yarn to find all these loops. So I've got my chain 2 here, right there is where I would normally go with my hook. That's the top of that V. So I want to look right in front of it and find that horizontal bar right there. This is not the same as the back loop. We're going in front of the stitch right now. We're going in front of the stitch. It's the horizontal bar in the front. If you're working into this bar in the round, it might be in back, but right now it's in the front because we're working in rows and we're turning our work. So I want to yarn over, find that very first stitch that I would work into right there, find the horizontal bar right in front of it, insert my hook up from underneath, just like we did with the smooth yarn, yarn over, pull that loop up and through, and then yarn over and pull through all 3 loops, just like we did before. So the half double crochet itself is exactly the same. We're just working it in a different location. So now that I've made that first stitch, I want to grab another stitch marker and put a stitch marker in the first stitch of this row. I'll set my hook aside a little bit here. So we want to take our time and find those top 2 loops there at the top of the stitch we just made, not the loop that was on our hook, but the top 2 loops at the top of that stitch, and put our stitch marker right in there. And then that way we'll know when we come back for our next row where the end of that row is, like so. Alrighty, so we get our hook back in there. I need to pull up some more yarn off my skein here. And then we yarn over and we find the next stitch. And if you need to, kind of flip it over and back, find that very next horizontal bar. It can be really easy to get confused here. And let's take a closer look at it here. From the back with this big fuzzy yarn, it kind of looks like there's a bar here and then there's a big one here that kind of in a pair. Here's our top 2 loops. There's that little cave we normally stick our hook into. There's this bar here and then another one going down here. This one right here, the one right in front of or right below those top 2 loops, that's the one we want to insert our hook under to make our half double crochets. So let me pull this one through. Like I say, we're going to be doing it again. We're going to do this all the way across for row 1. We yarn over. We can take our time and really find that next horizontal loop right there. And see, there's that down one, and it's the one right there, right in front of our top V. So we just get our hook right in that, right under that loop, yarn over, pull the loop up and through. Always remember to give that little extra tug there so our stitches don't become too tight, and then work those on through. Now, I did see one question pop up about, sorry, I have to pay attention to these too to get through these stitches sometimes. I did see one question pop up. Somebody said they did their 29 stitches and it seemed really short. The gauge given in the pattern, that would be a 54-inch long blanket. But as I mentioned, everybody's gauge is different. Everybody has, their own personal tension level, and everybody likes blankets of different sizes. So if you want to go ahead and add some extra chains to make your blanket longer, you go ahead and do that. As long as you get the fabric you like, then you can keep making it as long and as wide as you would like. So we are working into the third loop for these, or the horizontal loop for these stitches, on across here for row 2. And were there any questions I could answer? I'm sure there are.
Yes, so there's one here from Rebecca. So she's just looking to clarify the horizontal loop on the first V.
Yes. Okay.
So is the horizontal loop the first V that's not the turning chain, and then you go under one piece of the V instead of both, how you usually would?
No, this is not either loop of the V. So let's take another look. That was a great question. Thank you. Let me pull back up this. This one is a little bit easier to see though, I think. So I've just made this row of half double crochets, and there is our top V, right? Where we would normally work into with our hook. We're working, we're going to turn and work into the back of the stitch, and it's the loop right there. So if we look at the top, we've got our V's again. They're going this direction now, but there's still our V's at the top. That's those 2 loops right there. Normally, I would put my hook under those 2 loops. But if we turn it over, that horizontal loop now that's right underneath my hook, that's the loop we're actually looking for. So if you're having trouble finding those stitches, we can do that here as well. We can kind of use our hook to find where we're supposed to go. This right here would be the next stitch here. This would be the top V. I can put my hook in there and then look, what's the loop that's right underneath it. And I can use that, just grab that with my other hand. And now we can go under there. But it's that horizontal loop in front of that top V, because let me finish this stitch here, and then I can flip it over. Now we can see by working into that funny horizontal loop back there, this right here, these 2 loops, this whole ridge right here, that is the top V, the whole thing. Both of those loops have been pushed to the front of our blanket by working into that basically back part of the stitch. So that is how we create that texture right there. So I'm not doing double crochets in this pattern, but it is a half double crochet. We yarn over, find that next stitch. Now here's a good thing here. We are at our last stitch. I can tell because it's got my stitch marker in it. And again, normally I would go right under those top 2 loops that I marked my stitch marker with, but I want to come right below that, the loop right in front of it. And that's where I want to work that stitch. So since this is the last stitch for row 2, you can see with this big yarn, sometimes you can use your other fingers, whatever you need to do to finish that stitch. Since it's the last stitch for row 2, I'm going to go ahead and take that stitch marker out, because now it has done its job. And then I can set that aside until I need it again when I begin row 3. So this is what it looks like at the end of row 2. And right now you're looking at the back of the blanket. Remember, row 1 and the odd numbered rows are the right side of the blanket. So on row 2, it's always going to seem a lot smoother. All your texture should be coming on the other side of the blanket. If it's not, then you might be working in the wrong loop somewhere, or it's possible you skipped a row. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about row 3. So before I do it in the fuzzy yarn, again, let's go ahead and pull up our smooth example. So for row 3, we're going to start again with our chain 2, but now we're going to be working in the back loop only. And this is something someone brought up before, is the back loop only. And we need to take another look at our row of stitches that we've finished here. So we have those top 2 loops that we've been talking about that we normally work into, but we just haven't until now. Now it's finally time to work under one of them, but only one of them. When you look at those top 2 loops of that V at the top of a crochet stitch, The front one, the front loop is always the one that's closest to you, and the back loop is always the one that's furthest away. And that's it. It's that simple. It doesn't matter if I turn it this way, if I turn it upside down, if I'm working into the edge or I'm working under the underneath. The loop that is closest to you is the front loop, and the loop that is furthest away is the back loop. It's just that simple. It's just like that. So if you want to go under just the front loop only, you would insert your hook under just that front loop and crochet there. If you want to crochet under the back loop only, then you insert your hook right in the middle of that stitch and just go under the back loop. So, oh, look, there it goes. All right. Looked like it wanted to freeze on this end a little bit there. So that is front loop and back loop in crochet. So before we were looking under the horizontal loop, which was that loop right in the front of the whole stitch there. So we have our horizontal loop that we were working into in the previous row. Then we've got the front loop right there. And then we've got the back loop right there. So those are the different loops of the half double crochet that we're using in this pattern. But for row 3, we're going to be crocheting under the back loop only. Still half double crochets though. So let's set that one aside and go back to our big fuzzy example here. So we need another turning chain of 2. And again, we want to go ahead and make these a little bit tighter. Just gives a little bit nicer finished edge here on your blanket. There we are. And then turn. Remember to always turn like a book page, so that it always has that same twist on the sides there. And now we're back on the right side of our blanket, and we can see some of that really beautiful texture popping up right there. So now what we need to do is come back and look at our previous row. Before, we were looking for that horizontal loop right there. Normally, we work under both of these loops at the top right there. For this pattern, we want to go under the back loop only for this row. So we yarn over. Now we're going to find that top V right there, and we're going to go under the back loop only. So we want to insert our hook right in the center of that V so that it comes out the back of our work. And then we can yarn over and pull up our loop. Get a little bit more yarn off my skein here. There we are. Got our 3 loops on our hook, and we yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. With this big fuzzy yarn again, you can use your other hand as needed. So let's get my skeins and my swatch is getting a little bit big here, and they want to compete under my elbow. Let's do the next one. We want to come along, find that next V at the top of the next stitch. Remember, we're going to be going under the back loop only. So we yarn over, insert our hook right in the center of that V. So we go under just that back loop, the one that's furthest away from us. Yarn over, pull that loop through, yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops. You can use your other hand, you can use your muscles of your arm to pull them through, however works for you. Now, let's see what that's doing. Because we're working in that back loop only, that front loop is remaining unworked, and now it's pushed to the front of our fabric, just like that ridge the top 2 loops were when we were working the previous row. So now we are creating yet more texture. Might be even easier to see here in our little swatch right there by working into the back loop only. So here on the smooth swatch, this is the effect of working into the horizontal bar. It pushed the front and back loop forward, but now we're working under the back loop only, and that right there is that front loop left unworked. So that creates the texture at the front of this blanket. So let's do a couple more of those stitches. And then I want to make sure to talk about how to add more skeins and how to finish off your blanket, because again, this big fuzzy yarn is so much fun to work with, but it requires a little bit of special treatment. So let's take a couple more. We're going to yarn over, find those 2 loops at the top of the next stitch, insert your hook just under the back one, yarn over, pull it through, and yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops. And we'll do another one together here. We'll yarn over. Go ahead and take a moment to find that next stitch. Find the back loop. Go under just that back loop. yarn over and pull that loop through your stitch. Give a little tug up on your yarn there, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. That's just something I wanted to mention about this yarn as well. Because it is so fuzzy, and I've been talking about pulling up on your loops and, just giving a little extra tug on it to make sure everything pulls through really nicely. You'll notice if you've seen me crochet before, watch my other videos, I do tend to hold my crochet hook more of a pencil style like this. And with this big of a hook, I find it more comfortable to hold my hand like this. So it does require some adjustments. You can really kind of adjust the way you're holding your hook. Make sure to take breaks if you need to and stretch a little bit. A long session with big, thick yarn and a big hook, especially if you don't crochet very regularly, can be very fatiguing to the hands and arms. So you want to make sure to take breaks and take care of yourself as well. So again, we go to that next stitch, find just that back loop, go under just that back loop and yarn over, pull that loop up and through, and yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. Now, that's why I love my stitch markers. There it is, hanging out right for me. Tells me I've got to my last stitch. So I'm going to yarn over, and I can go ahead and pull that stitch marker out of the way and go under just that back loop right there. And yes, for those who are having trouble keeping up, I understand we only have an hour, which really isn't enough time to go over the basics of how to crochet as well as how to crochet this blanket. So there will be more Crochet 101 classes coming up. There's already, I believe, a couple on the Michaels YouTube channel. And this class itself will be available on the Michaels YouTube channel, usually within 48 hours. And, then you can pause it and rewind and go back. But I just want to make sure we get through everything we needed to cover today to make this blanket. So now I have worked all the way across here for row 3 on our swatch. I pull that loop up a little bit here so I can pull this hook out and we can take a closer look at it. So now we've got that ridge that we made when we made row 2 that pushed those loops forward. Now that we've made row 3, we've got the ridge right here. This is a little bit harder to see. It's not as obvious as the other one. It's a little more subtle, but that's okay too. But it gives us that really great texture over the body of the blanket. Again, a little bit harder to see on the fuzzy stuff than it is to see on the smooth, but it really is such a pretty effect for this yarn. And by keeping those turning chains tight and by working into that bottom hump, you can have some really nice edges to your finished blanket. So with all that said, if you want to make more than just a little swatch, you're going to need more than 1 ball of this yarn. So with standard yarns, normally to add a new skein of yarn, we would just kind of complete a stitch with it or maybe finish off a stitch and start a new stitch and then weave in those ends. This big fuzzy yarn, weaving in those ends can be difficult. It's hard to hide them. You can't really split the yarn itself because of the way it's constructed. So we have to treat it a little bit differently. So for this, what I recommend, and I did see a question pop up, if you are a complete beginner, I would say absolutely do not learn how to crochet with this yarn. It's a wonderful yarn, but it is not a good yarn to learn how to crochet with. That was the reason I was pulling up this little swatch to show you those different loops and things. I understand it's difficult to see in this yarn, so it's not the best yarn to actually learn how to crochet with. It's a great yarn for once you've got the basics under your belt. Don't get rid of it. Hold on to it. Practice a little bit with a smoother yarn, and then come back and use this yarn. In fact, I'd recommend you pick up a skein of something like Lily Sugar and Cream or maybe some Bernat Handicrafter and practice this pattern with whatever hook is recommended on the yarn. It should be about a 5mm, and that will make a great little washcloth. And then you'll have an experience with all the stitches and you'll have a beautiful little washcloth or dishcloth you can use, and you'll feel a lot more comfortable with it using it with the big thick stuff that's a little harder to see. So you saw I just cut the yarn. Why on earth would I do that? Well, because I'm going to pretend that I ran out of yarn and now it's time to add another skein. So what am I going to do? I'm not going to tie them together into a knot. That would make a big bulky knot. And I don't want to just try and weave these ends in because that isn't going to feel as secure. And it's going to just create a lot of lumps and texture with this yarn that I don't want. So what I recommend that you get out is some good old-fashioned sewing thread and a sewing needle for this one. Got some Coats and Clark here. It doesn't have to be a perfect match to your yarn. You can see this one's a little bit darker, but it's going to get hidden anyway. It's going to get hidden down in this fuzzy yarn really well. So, but the closest you can get is, is better, just in case some of the thread peeks through. Now, I did see a question pop up asking if this was similar to loom bands, and I remember loom bands, but I never used them. So I'm afraid I'm not qualified to answer that question. So let's go ahead and take those two ends. We've got the two ends of the yarn here together, and to sew them together, we're not going to do anything really fancy. We're just going to sandwich them together here, an inch and a half or so in. And then we just take our sewing needle. I've already pre-threaded it here and put a knot at the end. And then I'm just going to sew straight up through both of those layers. Hopefully that's coming across here well on camera. But we want to just pull that right through and then just head back down the other direction. And do that a bunch of times until you feel that they are securely connected. So I like to change angles a little bit as I do it, kind of go across, go through, go different directions. But after only a few stitches, it really doesn't take that many. Oop, got the end of my needle there. I'm just sticking my finger. There we go. So after just a few stitches, really, you can see it really does. It is, I don't know if you can hear that. Woo! Put it in the microphone there. You can hear it actually. It is tight. It's not going anywhere. So once you've got those basically sewn together, you want to make sure, get your yarn pulled nice and tight, and then you can just tie that end right off. Just put a couple knots in your thread here, cut off the thread. You can trim off the yarn ends if you like. I don't recommend getting too close. But the great thing, again, is because it is this big fuzzy yarn, that's going to get pretty well hidden. So here I have simply sewn those two ends together like so, and then I can just continue crocheting. Let me find my hook here, and then I could just continue to crochet with it just as if no break had been in there. Let me pull that a little tighter. So here I would have looks like it would land in my two turning chains here. So with the turning chains, it wants to be a little tight. Here we go. But you can see it really does just kind of work right in there. And now it's just going to be as part of the blanket. So when you get to the end of the blanket and you've finished off your work completely, what you need to do, and this is a little bit more for the beginners here, but when you've made your very last stitch of your blanket, again, you do need to cut your yarn. So let's go ahead and cut that again. And then what you want to do is you've got a couple choices. You can pull yarn over and pull that last yarn end through, or you can just pull up on your hook. Whichever you prefer, it's totally up to you. A little bit more secure to yarn over and pull that yarn end up and through first, and then give that a little bit of a tug down. And you can see now that stitch isn't going anywhere. It's all nice and secure. So then you take that very last end of yarn, and what we want to do is we want to hide it as much as possible on the wrong side of the blanket, the flat side of the blanket. We can see here, this is the side with all our texture. So I'm going to flip it over here to our smoother side. And then I'm just going to use my fingers because this is big, thick yarn. I don't want to try and find a yarn needle that's going to fit it. So I can just use my fingers and kind of slide it under some of the other strands until I get it a ways into the interior of the blanket. Find whatever loop looks like a good place to put it under. And then when you've worked your way into the blanket a little bit, you feel like, okay, that's in there pretty good. Then you can pull out your sewing needle again and just hold. You don't have to go all the way to the end, leave a little bit of wiggle room here to make it easier for yourself, but just hold sort of that end strand next to whatever strand it ended right next to. And then you can sew those together as well. And then trim off the excess or tuck it into the inside of the blanket. But sewing those ends together is going to give you a really nice, secure hold on those ends. And it's going to make your blanket washable, because that's one of the things I love about this yarn and about these projects. These big chunky blankets with these big thick stitches are so popular and such a great look. But so many of the ones that are commercially available are difficult to wash, if not impossible. And this yarn is machine washable and dryable, making it a really great project, for actual using in the home instead of just displaying on the guest bed. So were there any questions I can answer here in our last 9 minutes or so?
Let me see. There's definitely some beginners here that, we
Hmm.
encourage you to keep on trying. I let them know. So there is going to be a Crochet 101 class with Tamara on February 1st. So we definitely would suggest coming back to us for that. Um, Let me see if you have any other questions about the blanket today. Please feel free to drop them in the chat. We have a little bit of time, but I'm going to scroll back and see if I can find any that I missed.
And here, I'll just go ahead and talk a little bit more. Here's the texture on our smooth yarned one, which is a little easier to see. And again, this is where those two loops were pushed forward by working the horizontal bar. This is the ridge. And then you just work back and forth in rows. And we repeat row 2, then row 3, then row 2, then row 3, on until we've got the width of blanket we'd like. They recommend going until it's about 30 inches wide. Personally, I like my blanket a little bit wider. So if you've got some more yarn, you can go a little bit wider if you like. They just do recommend that you end on a row 3 repeat, which is what I've got right here. This was a row 3 repeat. You can see that gives us one final ridge of that front loop only. And then one other really neat effect of working this particular stitch pattern, the way it's worked, is that you can actually kind of see, if you follow along with our turning chains, how those little ridges twist back and forth across the surface of the blanket. I did see a question pop up. How many rows can you get with one skein? Well, I believe this pattern called for, was it 5 skeins, Allie?
Yes,
5
it was
skeins?
5.
Okay, 5 skeins. And let's see, it doesn't say, it says to 30 inches. It doesn't say 30 rows, it says 30 inches. So it doesn't give a specific number of rows, but it does say 2 rows equals 4 inches. So let's see. I'm trying to do the math on it. That's a lot of math in my head, off the top of my head here. If 2 rows, well, let's go ahead and do the math here. If 2 rows, for those who haven't seen the math before, 2 rows equals 4 inches. Then for 30 inches, we most likely have 60 divided by 4. My calculator is my camera. So 15. So it's approximately 15 rows wide, and if we're using 5 skeins, then I would say each skein should give you 3 rows. But that's, of course, a rough estimate. So I'm sorry, I missed the very last question. It went by too quickly before I could catch it.
Let me see. Well, Christine said she chained 42 and she's averaging about 1.5 rows per ball. So
Okay,
that gives you a good frame of reference.
Yes, if you want a longer blanket or a bigger blanket, like a queen or a king, you're going to need to add more yarn. You're going to need more than 5 balls. Let's see, make sure we have the time for more math here. We do. Okay, so this blanket is 30 inches by 54 inches. So 30, I'm going to need somebody with a calculator to type some answers, some math answers for me here in the chat. What's 30 times 54?
1,620.
1,620. So we've got 1,620 square inches in our blanket. And I'm sorry, was the question, I got so caught up in the math. Was the question how many balls you would need, or how many?
Oh my goodness.
I know there's so many different ways to approach it. So, okay, so how many balls? So for that size of a blanket, we need, so 1,620 square inches, we're going to say 5 balls. If we wanted to make, I don't know off the top of my head what a queen size blanket is, but let's say 90 by 90, which would be what, 1,800 square inches?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to do the math, we need to do fractions. We need to do our fractions. So 1620 over 5 equals 1,800 over question mark. That's the part we want to find out. So now we multiply. We cross multiply 5 times 1,800. Feel free to shout out an answer.
9,000.
9,000. Thank you. So 9,000 And then we need to divide that 9,000 by 1,620, which I'm really not going to try and do with my head.
5.5.
5.5. So that can't be right. I must have done the math on here wrong. 30 times
the 90
54.
times 90 is 8,100.
8,100. That's why. 8,100. Okay, thank you. See, this is why I like to have a calculator at these times. So 81,000 or 8,100 times 5 is
40,500.
40,500. Okay, that divided by 1,620.
25.
25. That sounds right. Okay, 25 balls to do a blanket that would be 90 inches by 90 inches. Is that a queen size? I'm not sure. I don't have the blanket measurements in front of me, but it should give you a pretty rough estimate to go from there. One thing you'll want to look for when you buy your yarn, let me flip this one over here. You want to make sure not only that you're getting the same color, but check the numbers, and you want to get all these numbers on this section of the label to be as close to each other as possible, if not the same. And that will make sure that there's no variation in the colors, because sometimes different dye lots can end up in different shades. So if you're buying your yarn at once, you want to check those numbers and get the same dye lot so you can get all your yarn at once. That said, if you need 25 of them, I would recommend placing an order for pickup because I don't know if you're going to find 25 of them in your store all in the same color. This blanket with the 5 balls, according to the pattern, is 30 inches by 54 inches. So you would be that initial chain of 29 or 27 plus 2 for the turning chain should give you approximately 54 inches in length. And then you keep making those rows, repeating rows 2 and 3 until it's about 30 inches wide, or you can add another ball and go wider if you'd like. So you can very easily adjust this pattern. You can basically chain until it's the length you want it to be, and then keep adding rows until it's the width that you would like it to be. So there you go. All right. Any other questions here I can answer as we're wrapping up?
I don't. Let me just make sure. I don't think so.
Okay.
I feel like we covered it. Thanks for all the math help, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was like, that can't be right. Those numbers were too funny, but that's why calculators are important. Thankfully, our teachers were wrong, and we all now have them in our pockets. So there we go. We can go ahead and I think come back to the other camera. I'll move this one out of the way. All right, there we go. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. I just wanted to take a minute and wish everybody a happy new year and say thank you again for joining us tonight. Again, if you are a brand new crocheter, thank you so much for joining us. Keep practicing. Join us for Crochet 101. Don't get rid of this yarn. It's going to be really fun to work with once you get a little more used to the stitches and you're able to read your work a little bit more. Like I say, give it a practice with some Lily Sugar and Cream, and you'll have a beautiful washcloth as well as your blanket.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Tamara. And everybody, just a reminder that this class recording will be available on YouTube in about 24 hours. So do check back there for the class recording. And we hope to see you again in another Michael's Community Classroom.
Have a great night, everybody.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.